Good day, I'm Abolore. On today's episode, we'll be looking at price control, which is also called price legislation. So, before I delve fully into price control, let me quickly talk about how prices are determined. So, price determination can occur in two different markets: free markets and regulated markets. Free market is the same thing as market-based economy or capitalist economy, where the private individuals or the capitalists take dominance, supervision of the various economic activities. So, in a free market economy, prices of goods and services are determined by the forces of demand and supply. Now, when that is the case, prices dangle. That's in a free market. It rises, it falls. But in the long run, after a while, equilibrium price or position will be attained. But before the equilibrium position will be attained, prices usually fluctuate. Today, prices might skyrocket by 20%, tomorrow 50%, you know, next tomorrow prices may, uh, plummet by 10% and all that. So there is always that a case of prices dangle. That means rising and falling. So the other market which we have is the regulated market, which we also call socialist or repressive economy. So in that market, government is the one that takes major control, ownership, supervision of the various economic activities. So in that market, prices are not usually allowed to dangle. They are usually being fixed by the government using price control. So most times in a free market where prices dangle, governments will now intervene. Government will come in by stabilizing the price in that particular market, which is free market, where prices fluctuate, rises and falls. So that particular tool that the government will use to fix the price in that market where prices fluctuate is called price control or price legislation. So price legislation now, let's concentrate on that now, is the fixing of prices of goods and services by the government through the law. So governments will come out and say publicly that this is the price at which these particular goods or services must be sold by the seller and all that, or producers. So in a socialist economic system or regulated market, prices are not usually allowed to dangle. So most times when the government fixes the price, equilibrium position is no longer attainable because the government will fix the price either below the equilibrium or above the equilibrium. But in a free market, you will have the equilibrium, position or equilibrium price being attained in the long run. And that's just with respect to free markets. But regulated markets, nothing like equilibrium. The government is not, working towards or setting the price towards achieving equilibrium. So they will either fix the price above or below the equilibrium. So when we say price control, there are two types of it basically. And we have the minimum price legislation, which is also called price floors, and maximum price legislation. So we are going to be looking at each of these singularly. But before that, if you are just watching, or if this is the first time you are watching our video, please do like our videos and click the subscribe button. Don't also forget to ring the notification bell so that each time we put out a video, you will get notified. So thank you all in advance. So let's start off with minimum price legislation, which we also call price of floors. So minimum price legislation is the fixing of prices of goods and services by the government above the equilibrium in such a way that the price is not allowed to decrease below the statutory price fixed by the law or fixed by the government. So, in short, what the government is saying actually really is that this equilibrium price you have here, which is 10, PE 10, is relatively very low. Then government is now setting the price above the equilibrium. So PMIN is the minimum price legislation, which we also call price floor. Now you may want to ask, why would government want to fix the price above the equilibrium? That means a little bit higher than the equilibrium price, which is obtained in the free market. Now I'll give you about 2 or 3 instances with respect to why would government wants to set the price above the equilibrium. Number one is when government decides to discourage the consumption of some particular goods or let me say services basically that are detrimental, that are damaging to human health. Let's say for example, alcoholic products. Government will decide to set minimum price legislation that's fixing the price above the equilibrium, because a higher price means demand will be discouraged and supply will be encouraged. That's the case in which, or instances in which, one of the instances basically in which minimum price legislation can be fixed. In the case of government wants to discourage the consumption or abuse of some goods that are harmful or detrimental to human health, and that's the case of alcohol. So government will fix the price above the equilibrium. Then another instance in which minimum price legislation could be set or adopted, we have a case of, let's say, minimum wage. For example, minimum wage. Minimum wage, like you all know, is the lowest amount that the government can pay or that is payable to the lowest worker in a particular industry. And the lowest worker are usually the, let's say, the cleaners, the gatekeepers, and all that. So if governments notice that the minimum wage in the free market, that's in the capitalist economic system that is dominated by the private individuals, is, let's say, 50,000, which is this. Then if government considers that relatively very low, then governments, like you all know, government usually sets the pace at which all other stakeholders in the industry, will follow. So in that case, government will set a minimum wage which is above the equilibrium position which is obtained in the capitalist economic system. So government will fix it. Then all other players in the other industry, we will follow by paying the minimum wage. So minimum wage policy is also an example of minimum price legislation. I think the minimum wage in Nigeria now is roughly 70,000 by the federal government. So the government expects, so before now, minimum wage in the private sector is roughly maybe 30,000. The government raised it from, I think, 33,000, but in the private sector it's 30,000. But government uh was 33,000, but they later increased it to 70,000. That is above the equilibrium, the usual minimum wage that is payable in the private sector. So the government is setting the pace by saying everyone should be able to pay this minimum wage, of which we have set the pace for you all to follow. So minimum wage policy is a good example of price of floors. Now, also, you may have the case of, let me say, BRT of a thing. That's the bus rapid transport. That's Lagos State government renders services. That's transportation services to Lagosians. That BRT, let me say, bus fare is minimum price legislation. How? If we take a critical look at the equilibrium price as in the private sector, that's the commercial bus drivers, the equilibrium price there is roughly is 600 naira. Let's put it that way. That's, let's say, from Kola to Oshodi. That's 600. But the government is now setting the price of bus fare for BRT at 800 naira. That means above the equilibrium price, which is obtainable in the free market. So that's an example of minimum price legislation. And why would government want to set the price above the equilibrium price, which is obtainable in the free market? It's just to, you know, discourage the abuse, the consumption of, BRT bus, services by all and sundry. Because Lagos State government is just saying that BRT bus services is only for the business class. So they are trying to ration out all those that are not business class oriented. So they expect, the Lagos State government expect that, as a working class, you should be able to afford that minimum price, which has been set by the government of Lagos State, which is 800. So they are trying to avoid the abuse of BRT, because if BRT or bus fare is pegged at, let's say, 300 naira or 400 naira, it will all be for all and sundry, and that will be abused. So by setting a minimum price legislation, it means it follows the minimum price legislation, which is price of floors. So those are instances in which we could have minimum price legislation being enacted. First, we talked about alcohol, to discourage the consumption of alcohol or goods that are damaging to health generally. Then we also talked about minimum wage policy is also in line with minimum price legislation, and also the case of BRT, bus, the thing also follows the minimum price legislation. So each time government fixes the price above the equilibrium, which is minimum price, there will, there will be excess supply, basically, which we call surplus. And the reason is just that, don't forget, a higher price will incentivize the producers to produce more. So the initial price, which is the equilibrium price, which is this, equilibrium quantity was 30. Then as a result of the increase in the price from this to this, that's from PE to PMIN, you see there is an extension in supply. That's from 30 to 50. So there is an extension in supply. That means there is an increase or expansion in supply, quantity supply. That's that. Then there is a contraction in the quantity demanded. That means demand has contracted from 30 to 20. So there is an excess supply by 30 units. That's 50 minus 20. So this region upward connotes surplus, which we call excess supply over demand. So I hope that is understood. Good. So let's talk about aims and objectives of minimum price legislation. Why would government want to perhaps set the price above the equilibrium? Let's say relatively high, not really that high, but relatively higher than the equilibrium price. So aims and objectives. Number one, price stability. Do not forget that, be it minimum price legislation or maximum price legislation, the aim of government of fixing any of those price control is to ensure that prices are stable. Basically, to, make sure that most times the uh, let me say, consumer surplus are not eroded, and to ensure that producer surplus keeps increasing. But basically, price stability, to make sure that prices are stable, because the major reason government wading in the private sector where prices fluctuate is to ensure that prices are stable. So price stability, that's number one objective of minimum price legislation. Then number two, to back consumption or abuse of some goods, like we've talked about, alcoholic, goods that are detrimental, that are harmful to human health. If government wants to discourage the consumption of such goods among the citizens, then government will fix minimum price legislation. That's fixing it above the equilibrium, which we have it. Then 3, protects the seller's welfare. Do not forget, we did say that a higher price means the producers will produce more, and as a result, more revenue for them and more profits. And more profits means the standard of the living of the producers will increase. So this minimum price legislation is aimed at promoting and improving the welfare of the producers, because the government is saying, oh, come on, come and sell at a very higher price. Come and produce and sell at a very higher price. That's basically what it means. And the more profit for the producer means the more the standard of the living of the producers or sellers will increase. So this minimum wage is at the interest of the producer. So government is setting it at the interest of the producers. That's what it means. That's minimum price legislation. Then ensure payment of minimum wage. Minimum wage, like I explained, is the lowest amount that can be paid to the lowest worker in a particular industry. And you have them to be cleaners, gatekeepers, let me say, yeah, others, maybe messengers and all that. Those are the lowest worker in any particular industry. So if the revenue of the seller increases as a result of selling at a very higher price, their profit also increases. And when their profit increases, they will be able to pay that minimum wage, which the government has set the pace by paying in the socialist or in the regulated market to its staff or workforce. So government has started paying it. So government also wants to encourage some other players in other industries to be able to pay the minimum wage. Then they set the uh, minimum wage a little bit higher. Then we did say here that when the profits of the sellers, producers increases as a result of the government setting a higher price for that particular product, then they will be able to pay minimum wage because now their profit has increased. And also this minimum wage, the government is setting it, that's minimum price legislation. The government is setting it so as for the producers to be able to cover the cost of maintenance, the cost of repair, the cost of insurance, cost of administration, because the higher the price, the more the revenue and the more the profit. And the more the profit, the more you'll be able to cover all those maintenance costs as a producer or as a seller in any particular industry. So the case of BRT now, when BRT bus fare is being pushed up a little bit, it means one of the reasons could be that the government, wants the those private sector guys that government has given out those slots for them to cover a particular location in terms of taking all those working class from their destination to their various place of work, will be able to cover all those costs of running the business as a whole. So it's also one of the reasons that's in order for the producers or sellers to be able to cover some cost of maintenance, cost of repair, cost of insuring the business, and all of that costs that are attributable to running the business. So these are some of the aims and objectives of minimum price legislation. Then let's talk about the effects, consequence of governments imposing a minimum price legislation. That is a price that is above the equilibrium price, which is obtainable in the free market economy. Then number one, higher price. Prices will be higher than the equilibrium price. So you can see that here. So prices are very high. So that's payment you have here. Then supply. Supply will increase. A higher price will incentivize, will encourage the producers to produce more. So as a result, you will have excess supply, just like we did, talk about that there is excess supply of 30 units. That's 50 minus 20. So supply increases, then demand will fall. In this case, prices are very high. Demand will decrease. Supply will increase. So when supply increases and demand decreases, that will result in surplus. So surplus will be the case, and surplus simply means excess supply over demand. Then costs. Now, look at this. We did say there is a surplus here. Now, what would the producers do with the surplus? Will they destroy it? No. But for a developed economy are wealthiest economies of the world, like United States, Germany, France, United Kingdom, and all that. Those excess surplus, the government will come in and buy it from the producers. Then the process of government coming in and buying those surpluses from the producers, we call it intervention buying. So the cost of buying those excess or surpluses might be, let's say, the government ought to have invested those funds into building more viable projects, or let me say, building more infrastructures that will improve and expand the productive capacity of the economy. Or let's say the cost of buying the surplus, perhaps the governments of, let's say, developing economy, like let's say South Africa, uh, Nigeria, which is a lower developing economy, maybe that they have to borrow in order for them to be able to buy the surpluses. So the cost of borrowing, which is interest, the opportunity cost of it, is also very high. So the cost of buying those excesses, the opportunity cost of it may be relatively very high in terms of the government coming in to buy the surplus. So opportunity cost here. So that's basically what we mean by that. Then the opportunity cost of this also could be uh, whereby, because when the government buys the surplus, what will they do with it? Most times they will dump it in another, let's say, less developed economy or lower developing economy, and that may create a kind of international related issues between the two countries, whereby you now see tariffs being increased tremendously, like the case you have now between China and United States, whereby there is a trade war between the two economies of the world. So opportunity cost of buying the surplus by the government could also create a kind of international related issue among countries, and that's detrimental. That will be detrimental to both economies in terms of making the balance of payments deficits or unfavorable. Then black markets. This may also create a black market. That's minimum price legislation. Look at this. We said the price is relatively above the equilibrium price. That's what we have. Now, let's take the case of BRT, for example. Those passengers, that's the working class, that cannot afford that 800 naira, which is the P, mean, that's the minimum price. If they cannot afford that, or those that cannot afford that 800 naira, how will they get to work? Then what that means is that they will have to bypass the standard of tapping in before they go in the bus, and they will have to cut corners by at least maybe tipping the bus drivers of the BRT, or tipping the bus conductor in order for them to get in or get on the bus and go to work. And the opportunity cost of that as well, you know, all the monies that ought to have gone to, the purse of the government will now be, going to personal purses of the bus drivers and, conductors. So that particular market where you have the bus conductors, the bus drivers, and the passengers conniving, you will have that market called black markets. And black market simply means you know the particular markets where uh, goods are sold at illegal prices, be it above or below. But here now, the passengers will resort to selling it below, buying it below the equilibrium, because they cannot afford this minimum price legislation. And don't forget also, this dumping. Dumping is also an example of black markets, which is also called parallel markets, and it means you are selling that particular used product to another country below its cost of production, or below the price at which the goods is obtained in that country it is produced. So it's also some sort of black market, that's dumping. But it's usually you're selling the goods below its cost of production because you've produced them in excess, basically. So that's basically the effects, or those are the effects of minimum price legislation as one of the types of price control or price legislation that we have. So I hope this is understood. Now, before I delve into this, let's talk about the impacts of minimum price legislation on the consumers, the producers, and the government. On the consumers are not really, you know, going to be liking these minimum price legislation. They are not going to be a real fans of minimum price legislation because their consumer surplus have been eroded due to the higher price, which is fixed above the equilibrium. So consumers are not really a big fan of minimum price legislation because the price is relatively very high, and as a result, their consumer surplus will be eroded. That means will be taken away completely by the producers. Then on the part of the producers are going to be a real fans of minimum price legislation because it's increases their producer surplus. And if also the surpluses which the producers have been purchased by the government through the intervention, buying that we did talk about earlier, then it means the producer's revenue, that's the producer's surplus, will increase much more than when the surpluses are not bought by the government. So producers, they are real fan of minimum price legislation because they are going to be smiling to the bank because the prices are very high. Then on the part of the government, depending on what they want to achieve, perhaps we did say here that perhaps the government wants to protect the producers from price volatility. That's why the government is raising the price above the equilibrium. Price volatility means sudden fall in the price of particular goods or services, and that may lead to the crash of the market. So if the government is trying to protect the welfare of the seller by making sure that it protects the producers from price volatility, then we will say that the government is also a big fan of minimum price legislation. So that's with respect to the impact of minimum price legislation on the part of consumers, producers, as well as the government. Then let's talk about maximum price legislation. So maximum price legislation is also one of the types of price control that we have. So with respect to maximum price legislation, it is the fixing of prices of goods and services by the government below the equilibrium price in such a way that the price is not allowed to increase above the statutory price fixed by the government. So this is the statutory price fixed by the government that is enacted by the government into law, and nobody must sell above this PMAX, which we have it. This is the equilibrium price. So what government is saying is that this equilibrium price is relatively very high. So government is downplaying the price of that particular goods or services to this below the equilibrium, which is PMAX. So mostly, why would governments, or what are the instances in which governments could adopt or could implement maximum price legislation, which we also call price ceiling? One of the instances is to ensure that everyone is able to afford basic food items. That's necessity, essential food items. So government will downplay the price by reducing it below the equilibrium. And another good example is rent control. Governments may dictate to all the landlords in a particular city that this is the rent that they must charge in order to rent out their apartments to any potential tenants or citizens that intend to take up that apartment. So it's also an example of maximum price legislation. So rent control is an example. And with respect to maximum price legislation, You can see now that due to the fall or the downplaying of the price by the government below the equilibrium, you will see that there is an extension in demand from 30, which is the equilibrium quantity, to 50. Then there is a contraction in supply from 30 to 20. So there is excess demand by 30 units. That's 50 minus 30. So each time prices are set below the equilibrium, you will have the case of excess demand, which we call shortage. And shortage simply means there is more demand over supply for a particular goods or services. So I hope that is understood. So let's talk about the aims and objectives of maximum price legislation. Then we have number one, price stability. So be it minimum, maximum, number one objective of fixing the price either above or below the equilibrium is to ensure that prices are stable. They do not fluctuate. They do not rise and fall day in, day out, week in, week out. No. Then two, ensure affordability of goods. Let's say, for example, government wants to ensure that people have access to basic food items like groceries, rent, that's shelter. Then government will ensure that it fixes maximum price legislation. So when the prices are very low, then the affordability of that product will increase. That means people will be able to afford it. That's basically that. Then control inflation. Inflation, like you all know, is a general increase in the prices of goods and services, over time. So if government wants to downplay inflationary pressure and as a result reduction or curbing inflationary rates, then you will have it introduce maximum price legislation. So maximum price legislation is aimed at controlling inflation, because when prices are suppressed, when prices begin to plummet, it means inflationary pressures will be reduced, and as a result inflation rates will also reduce. Then lastly, protect the consumer's welfare. This maximum price legislation you have here is designed to help protect the welfare of the consumers in terms of the standard of the living of the consumers will now increase, the cost of living will reduce. So if cost of living is to be reduced, then prices have to be downplayed. So and that's what we have here. That's maximum price legislation. That's fixing the price below the equilibrium. So when you have the price fixed below the equilibrium, you will have the consumer's welfare to improve positively. So that's with respect to the aims and objectives of maximum price legislation. Then you have the effects of maximum price legislation. So number one, prices are very low. That's lower price. You can see below the equilibrium, that's Pmax. Then demand will increase. Don't forget, a lower price. Consumers are, they're a big fan of, lower price. That means they are price sensitive, basically. So when prices are very low, demand will increase. And when prices are very low, supply will decrease. So demand will increase. That means we have demand to be pushed up, because now you have the purchasing power with the consumer to have increased due to reduction in the prices of the goods or due to fixing of maximum price legislation. Then you have supply. Supply will reduce. Producers are not, a fan of lower price. Producers always want prices to keep skyrocketing or increasing. So when they produce more, they sell at a very higher price, and as a result, higher revenue and higher profit. So because prices are very low, supply will be very low. Then this is what you have. Because demand is increasing, supply is decreasing, then that will result in shortage. And shortage simply means excess demand over supply. And the shortage you have here, that's 50 minus 20, and that gives us 30. Then black market, look at this. Be it minimum or maximum price legislation will result in black market. So the black market you have here is that there is excess demand now. So some consumers will be able to get these products, especially those that can wait in line or in queue, or those that know government officials, or those that can bribe their way will be able to get the service here. How about those that are not able to get the service? So where would they resort to get the service? Because we said it is essential. Like let's say BRT bus now. So as a result, they will resort to getting it in the black market, and that will be at a very higher price because here now there is excess demand, and each time there is an excess demand, it will create a situation or a scenario of survival of the fittest. So survival of the fittest, some will not be able to get it. So anything government of a thing, so as a result of the fact that there is excess demand, anything government of a thing, let me brush up on that, they will usually create a kind of corruption practices and all that. So those that cannot be able to get the product here, which is essential, which is for everyone to have, will result to black markets. So they will rather go to buy it on the black markets where the prices of goods and services are obtained at illegal prices. That's either below or above the equilibrium. But here, they're going to be having it even above the statutory price fixed by the government because they need to have it. That's basically that. So the black market here means they'll be getting that product at a very higher price. But here, they'll be planning, the consumers will be planning to get it at a very lower price. Then cost of subsidizing. Now that there is excess demand and government is in charge of this maximum price legislation, how will the government meet up with the excess demand you have? Because there is excess demand of 30. Then what that means is that the government will have to subsidize the producers by buying them uh, mechanized equipment at a subsidized rate, by giving them monetary benefits, by buying them acres of land in order for them to be able to produce more in order to meet the excess demand. So the cost of subsidizing is also one of the effects of maximum price legislation. And the opportunity cost of that subsidy being paid by the government could have been, government should have invested it in a more viable projects, in a more efficient sector of the economy where uh, the result of which will affect the lives of the citizens positively, like building more infrastructures, building more roads, building more healthcare facilities, building more schools. So the opportunity cost of subsidizing uh, in order to meet the excess demand is relatively very high as well regarding what the money might have been divested into. So these are the effects of maximum price legislation. So let's talk about the impact of maximum price legislation on the part of the consumers, the producers, as well as the government. So the consumers are a real fan of maximum price legislation because they are going to be smiling to the bank because the prices are very low here. That's below the equilibrium. So the consumer surplus will keep increasing. That's as a result of the fact that the prices have been downplayed by the government. Then on the part of the producers are not a real fans of maximum price legislation because the government is dictating to them that you must sell your product at this so price. So as a producer, I would rather move all my factors of production and resources to all other sectors in which there exists nothing like maximum price legislation where the market is free, like a market-based economy, where I'll be able to maximize supernormal profits. That means selling at the prices at the equilibrium price and make my profit. So I'll move my resources. So when I move my resources as a supplier away from these markets where the government dictates, then what that means is that supply will reduce and you will have a case of shortage keep continuing to be the case in this particular industry or markets where this maximum price legislation is adopted. So producers are not really a good fan of maximum price legislation because they get to be dictated to as regards how much they are going to sell their products and all that. Then lastly we have government. So government depending on what the government wants to achieve. If the government wants to standardize the standard of the living of the consumers, then fine, the government will be a real fan of this maximum price legislation. Improve the purchasing power with the consumer, affordability of essential goods items and all that. So the government will definitely be a real fan of this maximum price legislation. But on the part of subsidizing to meet the excess demand of 30 units, then the government may not be willing to subsidize or to continue to subsidize a particular sector, which the opportunity cost is relatively very high. So, but on the part of improving the standard of the living, ensuring affordability, improving the purchasing power of the consumers, then the government should definitely be a real fan of maximum price legislation. So this is basically what we have with respect to price control, which we also call price legislation. So uh, let's just rub minds with respect to this price control. Lagos State government is setting the pace in terms of the introduction of the BRT, that's the bus rapid transport, for over a decade now. That's that falls under minimum price legislation, like we've explained earlier, that the prices are a little bit above the equilibrium price, which is obtained in the free market economy. Also, in terms of Lagosians having access to, basic food items like groceries, basic food items, basically. Lagos State is also setting the pace by building and constructing fresh food hubs. We have a lot of centers in Lagos State, and price control is being set for those producers to sell those basic food items to Lagosians. So it's also price legislation, which falls under maximum price legislation because the prices are below the equilibrium, which is obtained in the usual market. That's a capitalist economic system or market-based economy. But generally regarding Nigeria as a whole, Nigeria economy, like I would say, is moving towards capitalist economic system. But presently, Nigeria's economic system is mixed. That means we have some sectors being controlled and regulated by the government and some by the private individuals. But in let me say in decades to come, Nigeria economy will be blown into a full market-based economy. But the idea here is just that no economy in practice, no economy can be fully capitalist and no economy can be fully socialist. But the elements of the capitalist may be more than the socialist. But for now, we are still, in that quagmire of practicing a mixed economic system. So I hope you all have learned a great deal regarding what price control or price legislation is about. So this is where we are going to be drawing the curtain for today. Um, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do like our videos. Endeavor to help share to friends and relatives whom this might be of great help. Uh, don't forget to also continue to support us in any way you can. And what more can I say? I wish you all a great journey in your academics. I'll see you on my next video. Do have a good one. Bye bye.